All right. So first things first, how are you?
I'm good today.
You say today, how come?
It's constantly fluctuating. So sometimes I find it a complicated question, but in general, I'm good. I think a lot of people these days are met with a lot of challenges, and all in all, I'm pretty good.
Okay. Well, this kind of brings me straight to why this new album Flore has been made because when this whole craziness started in the world, what made you reflect about a certain time of your life of kind of Puerto Rico and the music, and what made you kind of go down that road?
I think already for like maybe the last 3 years, I've been in that sort of like frame of mind, just because of a lot of things that happened one after each other. Mainly, I think I was done with the touring for the last record. When I think about it now, it's been 7 years that I released my last record, which is like um, double the amount of time than that I expected.
Mm.
Uh, in which I would, release something new. It took a long time. My father got very sick. He has Alzheimer's, he has dementia, and let's say it progressed really fast. So I had to kind of like decide if I was going to um, go and live with them for a while,
Mm.
see if I could help out there, and also to have contact with him before he disappeared, essentially. So I
Sure.
went to Puerto Rico and stayed there for about 4 months, and I think that that had a big effect on the last 3 years. Just being there for longer than just a holiday, um, speaking, Spanish and hanging out with people and being with my family. It kind of like it showed me that there are parts of the brain that sort of like are dormant, if you
Mm.
leave your country of origin. um I was never aware of these of how someday in midlife this sort of eruption of like your childhood or your
Mm.
your roots would surprise, can surprise you.
What kind of memories did that bring back being there? And obviously you grew up there, so did it bring back memories of the music that was played as you were growing up and those kind of things?
Actually, no, it's more like the music actually reflects a lot about what living there is like. Like, it's not
Mm.
that when I was there, I was really conscious of the music. It's more like the music is always there. Like these days, it's basically reggaeton coming out of every car in traffic, or when you're trying to sleep, there's reggaeton around the corner in somebody's car in a parking lot, and they're drinking and partying in a parking lot. So it's a very noisy country,
Mm.
and I realized that I still could sleep pretty well because I grew up with the windows open, motorcycles, gunshots, and also some salsa, and that was kind of normal. If you lived, I lived in the capital in San Juan until I was 17, and then there's the crickets and the small coquis are the little frogs that everybody's used to in Puerto Rico. In Hawaii, they drive people crazy. In Puerto Rico, it comforts you.
Sure.
So I would say that I didn't become more aware of the music because I already kind of was. It's more like I became aware of my body and of my senses, and how conditioned I am to those impulses that I can only get there. It also has to do with the humor of the people, with reactions, with the way people move, with how they talk. And the first 3 weeks were really weird because I realized that I was I was sort of somebody else. I had spent so much time here. I've been here about 25 years, so it was
Sure.
crazy. And then, I mean, I've gone to Puerto Rico many times since, but it's only after a month that you start to actually morph into another person, and
Mm.
things start to come out of your mouth, and you start to move in a certain way, and you realize that nothing really has been lost, and that. So I experienced my childhood more through very little things. It's hard to say. It's like a dream because it's so fragmented.
Sure.
But the music was always there. the painful thing is my father in Alzheimer's and in dementia has not really enjoyed music. Like you have these documentaries where people
Sure.
actually come
Yes.
alive when you show them the music of their youth. Or with my dad, it's the opposite. I think he loved music so much that, and he was actually a very open, sort of optimistic, joyful person. But in dementia and Alzheimer's, he's gone sort of to the other side of that. And we've tried to play him stuff that he used to like, and there's actually no reaction. So it was not really a 4 months of anything having to do with music. It was more
Okay.
about life and family. And I made some very, very good friends, and I saw them virtually every day at night. And it was more like plugging myself into the island again by doing very normal things.
Because one thing that's always interesting, I suppose, for somebody who leaves their home country for a long time, is that idea of identity, of where your home is, in a sense. And I suppose my Spanish isn't great, but no soy de aquí, no soy de allá. It's something that refers to that, I would say.
Yeah.
So did you struggle with that, with the fact that, well, you've, like you just mentioned, you've lived in Belgium about 25 years now, and then in New York for a time. So,
Yeah. I've never struggled with it until now, and that's the
okay.
interesting thing. And that must be a wiring thing. I don't remember really ever being nostalgic or missing a place, even though I've left many places. I left Puerto Rico when I was 17. I lived in New York for 3 years, and I've left Belgium a couple of times. I've lived in Amsterdam. Basically, it's not that I don't want to. It just seems to be something very deep in how I function, that I don't allow myself to miss a place or to get nostalgic. And that has some benefits, but I pay the price when I'm actually back in the place and all the emotions are waiting for you as you didn't process them yet. So for example, when I go to New York and I go to the neighborhood where I used to live, it's you get emotional. Or I go to Puerto Rico, or I come back to Belgium. There's always, it's almost like I experience it when I go back to the place. All that I didn't think about in order to make a clean cut and get out,
Right.
waiting there. That's the best that I can sort of explain what the experience is like. Now, in terms of identity, I really, when I was 17, I really entertained this idea of becoming a kind of world citizen. And I was kind of like, for many years, very proud of myself that I'm just, you just leave the island and now you belong to the world. That's how I sort of envisioned coming to Europe and having a career. And it's almost like, of course, I'm very connected to where I come from, but I didn't really give it much thought or experience it in a physical way at all because I was busy. I think that when you're in your 20s and 30s, you're just basically going, and it's pretty much an external thing. And all of a sudden, nearing 40, it just switched, and it happened with my dad's illness. And
Sure.
that's when I really understood identity, actually. And for me now, I would say that identity is something that you really have no choice about. That's something that's almost in, like, really in your body. And with the right conditions, it comes alive and it teaches you a lot about what is important to you, how you function. For example, now I realize being here, Belgium is a place that's given me a lot, and I love being in Europe, but I don't have those connections and those nuances with the language, for example. Like when I speak Dutch, I'm never going to exactly know the emotional small nuances that are behind what people say. And I realized that only quite recently, coming back from Puerto Rico, like when you guys speak with each other, you're picking up on such little cues, and I'm never going to have access to that. And that's actually, a lot of people say, yeah, but you speak it perfectly and you can, but that little part is where the fun is, and where the soul of a place is in those little things that only you and the person that understands can feel. And I think that has a lot to do with identity. So basically, I've been living with parts of me that are basically sort of disconnected a little bit.
Sure.
And it never bothered me. But now, once you're aware, you start to miss,
Those
that sort of,
nuances. And
yeah. So it happened to me very late, I have to say.
in those terms, then, because especially when you're talking about language, well, I'm sure you've written songs in Spanish before, but what was it like to approach a whole kind of body of work in Spanish and with these nuances that you were familiar with?
It was really fun, especially because you get permission not to have to think about it, because it's going to be your own dialect. You're just going to see what happens and throw the dice and see how you sung, how that day, how you sounded, how you decided to bring character to that song is usually very connected with just being yourself, especially when you're singing in dialect. But No Soy de Aquí, No Soy de Allá is a really good example. Like, there are songs on the record that I sang, some of my own songs and some of songs that are actually Puerto Rican songs, that I sang without really caring about my pronunciation, because that's how I felt that we would sing it. I didn't give it much thought. But with No Soy de Aquí, No Soy de Allá, since it's a song written by Facundo Cabral, made famous in Mexico by Chabela Vargas, who's actually from Costa Rica, that song, when I sang it with my dialect, it sounded horrible. It was like I didn't care about the song. So I needed to be a little bit more conscious of my consonants and of of really pronouncing every word. So I guess it goes song by song. Sometimes it didn't make sense to be so careful because it didn't fit the song. And I think that says a lot about Puerto Ricans in general. I mean, people can be articulate, and they can be obviously, and they can be they really can speak correctly so that everybody understands them. On the news, or a lot of actors, it's just like in Holland and in Belgium, like there's this correct way of speaking. We have exactly the same thing. But what I feel mostly connected to is what happens when we're not really paying attention to how we speak, and all this other stuff starts to come out, which is the dialect, and the humor is trapped in there, and some of these songs really have that in their DNA. So, sometimes I sang it just how I would be, how I would talk, like how I would talk that day with my mood. And I showed it to some of my friends, and sometimes they were like, man, you should correct that stuff, because that, it's not, an R is not the same as an L, like you really, and I said, why should I correct it if that's how we talk, So there was a bit of that tension on the album of like, should I really let go 100%, because otherwise nobody's gonna understand what I'm saying, or I should see song by song what fits the song, basically, and that's what I did. But most of the time it's pretty dialect.
Right. So it's more of the informal side, I would say, of the language, and the more practical, maybe. And what I find interesting then is I found this Nuyorican movement, which is this art movement in New York in the late 60s, early 70s. How aware of that music were you, or was this kind of like a research for you as well, last couple of years?
Basically, I decided to pick the songs that my dad really loved, some of the ones that my grandfather loved, but mainly my father, because they became the songs that I really fell in love with as well. And some of them are really, really popular songs. So there is a reason why, especially in salsa, it's not easy to cover a salsa song, because not all salsa songs are actually songs you can play on the guitar. Some have a structure that's very specific to the rhythm pattern, and to having an ensemble perform it. And once you strip it down, some of that stuff is just, it's very difficult to keep it. So I chose the songs that I could strip down and play on guitar by myself, except for Diablo. I think most of them passed the test of like, I could play the song alone with my guitar and it's still a complete song. And that happens to be some of the most obvious, for good reasons, probably some of the most popular songs. But in any case, a lot of those were urban songs. They were songs by Puerto Ricans in New York, as you said, in a time where the Cuban forms were being handed over or taken over by immigrant communities in New York, especially Puerto Ricans. So let's say that the forms a lot of the times are Cuban, but what Puerto Ricans did with them, it made it a very street level. It made it very urban, very gritty. It was very creative because also with the language, it starts to address, the US and being an immigrant community in the US, being among buildings, being in a ghetto, being in a whole different, not being on the island, so it adopts a very different sort of color. Also chord wise, I always thought when I was a kid that this stuff was dark somehow because it sounded a little ominous because the chords were minor. And there's like a semi-classical sort of like, it comes from a lot of it from European popular song, no? These chord progressions that are a little bit, they're not happy. They're not what everybody associates Latin music with, being festive. It definitely is festive because it's community. It's about people playing music together. But I remember being a kid and some of that stuff like El Ratón or Mujer Divina with the unison trombones, like playing these lines. For me, they were like a bit like slightly aggressive, a little ominous and funny. But it wasn't like, let's just celebrate. There was something behind it. It was about street life and mostly about love. But besides the lyrics, it was mostly the sort of like a city-like urban gothic atmosphere that I really attracted to. It's connected to soul music at the time. It's connected to blues. I mean, it's coming together in the States in a very specific way. And that's what the New York 60s, 70s for us represent. And although I didn't live there, my dad loved that stuff. So it made its way into our homes. It was played in every cafe. I mean, when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, I mean, I could hear that stuff everywhere. So you almost are ultra conscious of it by, through the back door. It's always there. And later on in life, when you really want to access it, you realize this stuff.
What I find interesting then, in terms of what you've done on your album with those songs and the music, is it sounds at the same time you can hear those, obviously you can hear those Latin elements, but the production techniques are very modern, and it sounds modern as well. So what was your approach? Because I imagine you've done this all by yourself at home.
No, I actually did. I made this album with my good friend and producer, Ruben Samama, who I met in New York. He also produced it. And actually, most of the instruments are played by Ruben. Okay. Which was very interesting because he doesn't understand Spanish, and he's not from Puerto Rico, obviously. And I think that made it very interesting, having somebody next to me who actually does not have the background, and he can only judge what I'm doing based on emotion. Sure. So it's like if it feels right, and that's a really interesting test, especially for Latin music, because it kind of puts it through this more universal filter of like, I will feel your performance by almost blindly by what I'm hearing and feeling, instead of by knowing what the context is or what it means, or even the original songs. I think Ruben decided not to listen to any of the originals. Okay,
that's smart, I think.
And that was really fun, because basically what would happen is like, there were a couple of songs during Corona that I just sent him vocals and just guitars on, and he built songs around them. Like La Torre, for example, was like that. Mujer Divina. But then when we could finally, the first lockdown was over, and that I went to Amsterdam, and we started to work song by song together by looking for ways of doing this that were not that would excite us, that were not close to the original in any way. There's almost like no real central percussion. There's no real conga playing a pattern, no trombones, barely any piano. So we purposefully, there was a drum set in the room, a bass and a guitar. So we purposely decided to play this album almost with no groove associated with Latin music at all. It was like, can we plow through this stuff and play a straight beat? And would that give us something that would ironically excite us more than trying to get into a Caribbean sort of vibe? We purposely played things in a very dead way with no groove. and I know that sounds a little perverse, but that was so much fun because it brought attention you sort of have to do it with the vocal, or you have to do it with other elements to bring something of the original, but you cannot do it with the groove. So it was very strange. It kind of accentuated a little bit that gothic kind of creepy vibe, because it's almost like you have like a karaoke band playing the whole album. Very straightforward. It's kind of ghostly in a way. So it was really, it was fun to do.
Is this, sorry to interrupt, but is this part of, because I saw a snippet of an interview you did on Belgian TV, and you mentioned kind of a certain self-destructiveness as an artist, that you have to kind of deconstruct yourself in order to grow and go somewhere else. Is this part of that you kind of try to challenge yourself in a certain way?
Yeah, definitely. And we both have it. That's why I think we work together so well. It really is like a sort of germ that and also sometimes it really is a blessing and a curse, especially in my case, because when I'm working on stuff, it's constantly active, and how I can break it down until I get something that seems more pure to me, or that satisfies me, or gives me a pleasure of like, okay, this is different, or this is something that is surprising myself. But it's a curse sometimes, because it just keeps going, and you just, up until the very end, I'm still trying to go at it with a pickaxe and see if I could shed another layer. And that you do definitely in a certain moment have to stop. And it doesn't have to do with perfectionism. It has to do with this hunger for, what if just a little bit further, what will we find if we strip it down more, or if we change that, or if we make it, I don't know, if we make it different. So yeah, we both have that. Yeah.
That's very interesting, because I suppose as an artist, that's kind of what you want, right? You don't want to make the same stuff over and over again.
Yeah. Sometimes I wish I could. Like, I see artists that and of course nobody makes exactly the same over and over again, but I really am like, I'm a fan of music that seems consistent rhythmically, and like you have early Johnny Cash, or you have Bob Marley with a couple of records, or Sleaford Mods, or like, you have this straightforward thing, and this is what we do. Sometimes I'm really like, I wish I could do that, but there's something in me that it just sabotages it constantly, and I've tried to curtail it. I mean, my last record, This Tomorrow's Midnight, is just cello, bass, and guitar the whole way. That's the closest I've come to something that sounds homogenous. But it's not long lived. All of a sudden, there's this germ again, and I have to say it's pretty powerful. So I can't really shake it off.
No, I was gonna say the only band that I think that really made the same album over and over again and got away with it is AC/DC. They can still make the same song with the same couple of chords, and it just, for some reason, it works. It works. Amazing.
I respect them for it as well, and it's like, and it's wonderful. I mean,
it's excellent. It's strange how you have artists like that, but then you also have artists like yourself, or a good example would be David Bowie, who pretty much changed every single album. Yeah. So it's an interesting the way artists approach these things.
Yeah, it is interesting how different people are from each other, and but what I think is interesting is like you cannot help it. It's not something that, for example, people who are always changing, I don't think people see them as courageous, but honestly, to tell you the truth, I don't think that's true. I think you just cannot help it. Like, actually, it's something that it's almost like a need that you have, a creative need to sabotage and break things apart, and you're only happy when you're doing that. So it's not like you're so brave. It's more like you have this artifact to your personality that you just cannot help.
But might it be connected then to the same sort of energy which we talked about earlier, which kind of made you take that step to move across an ocean and go somewhere else, and then move again across an ocean? And it might be the same type of energy, the kind of the need for change, or the need for development.
Yeah, and it's a sort of lust as well that's connected to something of like like jumping into stuff unprepared and testing your faith, or your ability to know you're gonna connect to something. Like it's impossible that I do not find my way, and that I don't achieve some sort of connection if I jump. And obviously that's easier to do when you're younger, for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
But it's something that is still very much alive in me. And I see it in Ruben too. It's like, I see it in how he builds songs, and because I've been there watching him do it. And there's a lot of like chances taken, you know, in the way of performance, in the way of singing, and trusting that something will gel. And you hear the risk taking in the music. I think if you're too careful, people will hear it, and that's probably the worst thing, is that they would hear that you, unless that's the album you want to make. But so there is something there in the juice of like, let's see what happens constantly, that sort of gels and makes people feel something, hopefully.
With that in mind, then, do you worry how your music is received? Or do you
Yeah.
think about that?
Yeah, I do. I wouldn't have admit this some years ago, but I do worry. Uh, Worry is maybe not the right word. I
Yeah, that
care.
was good.
Yeah, I care about, and sometimes, I mean, but I've been lucky not to have to worry. For me, worry would be like, okay, we released it and nothing's happening. Then you start to worry. But there's always been some kind of reaction, and I've been very lucky with an audience here in Belgium and people finding the music and sooner or later reacting to it. It took me a long time to kind of establish that before my first record. But so in that way, but caring about what people think, it's strange, man. Like while I'm making it, I don't care, but I do care because I'm always hearing with the ears of the audience as well. And that's the game that I really enjoy. Like seeing how much you can push something and still keep the connection. And honestly, the only thing that you can use to judge that with are your own ears. So I've always felt like you're part of your own audience, and you trust that if you hear something, people will hear it too, because we're not different. People think that just because you love music and you're aware of more, honestly, I'm not sure. I think people really feel what's there. That they can explain it as something else. But so I am constantly in the position of being a member of the audience myself. So I do care. And at the same time, I don't care because that's why I'm sabotaging this stuff. So it's a very strange relationship. I don't really understand it, but it's a bit of both.
Right, right. Well, in terms of kind of caring, then, because there are some songs, obviously, that there are classics and then that you've heard many times. Was there one particular or one song that now ended up on the album that you have a special connection to, maybe more than some others?
Let me think. Alma Mia, the opener of the record, was very special to me because the first time I heard it, it was a friend of mine who suggested it. I knew who Bola de Nieve was a piano player from Cuba who had this very sort of, for me, it sounds like a turn of the century, almost impressionistic way of playing piano. Also a bit cabaret, but also a bit satie. So very, very interesting mix with a Cuban singer-songwriter, because it seems like very European. And Alma Mia, I don't know, it haunted me a bit because it's just a very beautiful song. If you listen to the original, it has that fin de siècle, like Parisian kind of vibe to it. But he's basically singing about being alone in the world, completely alone. And although it's very beautiful, and if you don't understand it, it just seems like a very, sentimental thing. For me, it was very real, according to the time that when we were recording that, where everybody was isolated, and where I myself, for other reasons, just being the age that I am now, and having seen my dad, sort of like disappear into this illness, and also Puerto Rico with the hurricane, we had to move out. So I felt like for the first time in my life, like, where is my family? We're like spread out all over different countries, and here I am alone in Holland, making an album of music in Spanish during a pandemic. So there was like a lot of layers to that feeling of being solitary. It wasn't sad per se. It was more like being a satellite in orbit, singing a love song to being alone. And that I remember like very clearly, that was like, oh wow, this song is taking on a different meaning right now. But honestly, every song I kind of really enjoyed doing the whole thing. I mean, Diablo was great because it didn't have any relationship to the original, as I said, and it felt like we were very daring in terms of like really eliminating any connection to the original. And I'm sure that there will be people that you know think it's blasphemous maybe to do that with a song. But it was so much fun. Like, how are we going to pull this through? So yeah, I just, there was a lot of joy in figuring out each song, actually. Yeah, how we were
Right.
going to.
Yeah, the one that stuck out for me a little bit was Mujer Divina. It just you mentioned kind of that gothic vibe, and that really shines through in that song, I think. And it's just yeah, I really, the atmosphere really grabbed me in that song. Um, to round off them, because well, we're still living in a strange world, especially well, you mentioned isolation. I mean, here in the Netherlands, we have a curfew at the moment, so there's still a lot of that. Once we, and obviously we don't know, but once we will be able to perform and go out again, will you perform this in Latin? Do you want to play this in Puerto Rico, in Costa Rica? Is that a plan?
I would love to. I would love to. I would actually. I'd be already really happy to perform it in Holland and in Belgium.
Fair enough.
Things are going now. It's like, wow. But yeah, like I only played in Puerto Rico twice when I was there for those 4 months, and
Sure.
that was a that was incredible for me because I had never I performed there with punk bands when I was young, but I had never played any of my music, you know, since moving away. That was the first time. So I would love to do that, and at the same time, it would scare the shit out of me, to tell you the truth. Because there's something about going back home, and it's very exciting, and it's strange. I cannot really explain it, but to sing in your own language, and after having been gone for such a long time, you're sort of afraid that you're going to make mistakes. It's very strange. Like I think people who live there probably don't have that fear. It's more like you're so conscious of your mouth, you know, like but it would definitely be exhilarating to bring that back.
Yeah, because I could imagine, especially with those memories and the past couple of years, and then kind of the connection, the reconnection that you made with your roots. That must
Yeah.
be interesting to see how then the people from there will react to the music. And
Oh man, interesting and terrifying. But I would do it. I would do it. It would just be wow. The thing that we realized when we made this, and it's interesting that you pick up on it because it's really true, is that more than being an album of my father's youth or what he used to love, it's actually more an album about my youth because it's what he loved through the filter of my memory, and that's what makes it kind of like a blurry dreamy thing. It's like because memory tends to be like that when we're looking back at our childhood. It can be really it really can be like a dream. There's nothing necessarily very concrete. It just depends on sounds and your senses and what you remember, and you can remember it differently, you know, across a span of time. So I don't know, it's more that kind of thing. So people who grew up around the time when I did, I think they might also feel the same way. These are songs that our parents used to play that we didn't care about at all.
right.
And all of a sudden when you're older, they come to haunt you and you actually like that, you know? So that's the best way I can describe that. Yeah.
All right, Gabriel, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.